In today's world, global trade is no longer just about buying and selling. It's a battlefield of power, strategy, and survival. Tariffs, once seen as routine economic tools, have become weapons in high-stakes geopolitical games. The United States, China, India, and Russia, each is rewriting the rules to protect industries, secure influence, and shape the future of the global economy. From Trump's sweeping tariff offensives, to Modi's push for self-reliance, to Xi Jinping's Belt and Road expansion, and Putin's resource diplomacy, the chessboard of international trade is more complex than ever. In this video, we break down the impact of this new tariff era, the strategies nations are using to navigate it, and what it means for the future of global trade. Because in this game, every move counts, and the stakes couldn't be higher. We are witnessing a major global trade shift. Tariffs, sanctions, and export controls are becoming instruments of geopolitical strategy. Countries are no longer trading purely for profit. They are trading with power in mind. The United States is using tariffs to protect key industries and influence foreign policy. China is building alternative trade networks through initiatives like the Belt and Road. The European Union is focusing on securing supply chains for critical technologies. The impact is massive. Traditional supply routes are being disrupted, manufacturing hubs are shifting, and smaller economies are being forced to choose sides. Global trade is becoming less about free markets and more about strategic alignment, where economics and politics are deeply intertwined. India is facing tariffs of up to 50%, hitting sectors like electronics and engineering goods. Taiwan has been hit with 20%, a move likely aimed at the high-tech manufacturing sector. South Africa's exports now face a 30% tariff, and Canadian goods are at 35% unless they're protected under the USMCA agreement. And then there's China. The US was ready to raise tariffs on Chinese imports from 30% to a staggering 145%. In return, China planned to raise duties on US goods to 125%. For now, both sides have agreed to a 90-day pause. But this is more like a timeout in a high-stakes match. The real game is still on. The timing of these moves is not accidental. With global elections, shifting alliances, and economic slowdowns, trade policy has become a frontline weapon. The planned escalation to a 145% tariff on Chinese goods would have been one of the most aggressive trade actions in modern history. China's counter of 125% was equally severe. Right now, US-China trade relations are balanced on a razor's edge. The existing 30% tariff is already straining supply chains and pushing companies to relocate manufacturing. This 90-day pause is less about compromise and more about buying time. Time for both nations to prepare their next strategic step in a rivalry that is as much about technology and influence as it is about trade. One of the boldest moves in this entire tariff wave is the new semiconductor policy. The United States has announced a 100% tariff on all imported semiconductors, unless the company is actively building manufacturing facilities inside America. This isn't just about trade, it's about technological self-reliance. Semiconductors are the brains of modern technology, powering everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to advanced defense systems. By imposing such a high tariff, the US is sending a clear message. If you want access to the American market, you must contribute to building its industrial base. This strategy aims to reduce dependency on foreign chip manufacturing, particularly from East Asia, and to secure a critical technology that underpins both economic strength and national security. The global reaction has been sharp and, in some cases, furious. Switzerland described the tariffs as a horror scenario, warning that they could destabilize long-standing trade relationships. Brazil went even further, calling the move unacceptable blackmail, and signaling it may respond in kind. Across the world, more than 60 countries are now exploring reciprocal tariff plans. This means that instead of negotiating exemptions, they may simply impose their own duties on US goods. Such a wave of retaliation could trigger a chain reaction, where trade barriers keep rising and global commerce slows. For many nations, the question is not whether to respond, but how to respond without hurting their own economies in the process. India's response to the new tariffs has been swift and strategic. Facing duties of up to 50% on certain exports, particularly in electronics and engineering goods, India is working to reduce its reliance on the US market. Exporters are diversifying trade routes, increasing shipments to Europe, tapping into the Middle East's growing consumer base, and expanding partnerships in Africa. At the same time, the government is pushing for bilateral agreements that can secure better access for Indian products. This isn't just about damage control. It's about turning a challenge into an opportunity, building new markets, strengthening regional trade ties, and ensuring that no single country can dictate the future of India's export economy. Tariffs today are no longer just economic measures. They have become instruments of foreign policy. Governments are using them not only to protect domestic industries, but to exert pressure on other nations and shape global politics. Take India's case. The steep US tariffs are widely interpreted as a way to push New Delhi to reduce its oil purchases from Russia, a move that aligns with Washington's broader geopolitical objectives. Instead of negotiating directly on the oil issue, tariffs create economic discomfort that can influence decision-making indirectly. Brazil is another example. The tariffs here appear tied to political disagreements and concerns over Brazil's domestic policies. By making access to the American market more expensive, the US is sending a political signal: change certain positions, and economic pressure may ease. This approach shows how trade and diplomacy are now deeply intertwined. Market access has become a bargaining chip. Tariffs are being wielded not just to address trade imbalances, but to secure diplomatic concessions, influence alliances, and shift the balance of global power. In short, they are part of a broader strategic toolkit, one where economics, politics, and security goals are all linked together. From the supporter's perspective, tariffs can play an important role in protecting domestic interests. For India, this argument often centers on safeguarding local industries, creating jobs, and reducing dependence on volatile global markets. By imposing or responding to tariffs, the idea is to give domestic producers a competitive edge within their home market. When imported goods become more expensive, Indian-made products can capture a larger share of demand. This not only supports manufacturing and agriculture, but also encourages companies to invest in innovation and scale up production. Supporters also see tariffs as a defensive shield. In a global economy where larger nations often use trade policies to their advantage, targeted tariffs can prevent dumping, protect vulnerable sectors, and give India leverage in negotiations. In their view, it's not just about economics. It's about self-reliance, strategic autonomy, and ensuring that Indian industries are not undermined by sudden global shocks. Critics warn that heavy reliance on tariffs can lead to the dangers of protectionism. When countries close their markets or make imports too expensive, it can trigger retaliation from trading partners. This often results in a trade war, where everyone raises barriers, global commerce slows, and prices for consumers rise. Protectionism can also make domestic industries complacent. Without competition from abroad, some companies may delay innovation, reduce efficiency, or keep prices high. Over time, this can hurt the very economy tariffs are meant to protect. There's also the broader risk to global stability. If too many nations adopt aggressive tariff policies, international supply chains can break down. Smaller economies may suffer the most as they rely heavily on open trade for growth. In short, while tariffs can be a powerful tool, critics believe overusing them could isolate economies, slow development, and destabilize global markets. The global trade landscape is undergoing one of the most significant transformations in decades. For much of the late 20th and early 21st century, the dominant belief was that free trade and open markets would lead to shared prosperity. Countries lowered tariffs, integrated supply chains, and relied on each other's strengths to keep costs low and innovation high. That model is now shifting. In today's environment, trade is no longer driven purely by economic efficiency. It is increasingly shaped by strategic considerations, protecting critical industries, securing access to essential resources, and using market access as leverage in diplomatic and geopolitical negotiations. We are seeing the rise of selective globalization. Instead of one interconnected global market, the world is moving towards smaller, more tightly knit trade blocs. Nations are prioritizing friendshoring, trading and building supply chains only with trusted partners, over the old model of offshoring to the cheapest producer. This transformation means businesses must rethink their strategies. Companies that once relied on a single overseas supplier now need multiple, politically secure sources. Governments are drafting policies not just to boost exports, but to safeguard strategic autonomy in technology, energy, and food. In short, the global trade map is being redrawn. It is a shift from pure economic interdependence to a model where power, security, and alliances matter just as much as prices and profits. This isn't a temporary disruption. It's a structural change that will define the way nations and companies engage with the world for decades to come. As we look to the future, one thing is certain: global trade is entering uncharted waters. The predictability that once came with open markets and long-standing trade agreements is fading. In its place, we have a more volatile environment shaped by tariffs, geopolitical rivalries, and rapid shifts in alliances. The road ahead could take multiple paths. On one hand, sustained negotiations might lead to new agreements, creative compromises, and a more balanced trading system. Countries could work towards selective cooperation, protecting their strategic interests while keeping trade flowing in critical areas. On the other hand, failure to find common ground could fuel a prolonged cycle of retaliation and counter-retaliation. This would push nations deeper into protectionism, fragment global supply chains, and slow overall economic growth. Smaller economies, heavily dependent on trade, would be the most vulnerable in such a scenario. The long-term impact of today's decisions will be profound. Industries may be permanently restructured, regional trade blocs could overshadow global institutions, and the concept of economic globalization as we've known it may never fully return. In this evolving landscape, adaptability will be the most valuable asset for nations, businesses, and workers alike. Tariffs, once seen as temporary measures, are now shaping the very architecture of global commerce. How the world navigates this moment will decide not just the flow of goods and services, but the balance of economic power for decades to come.